All right, as we get started and we head into the next panel, I wanted you to take note of, and also for those of you who are joining us a little late, just bringing it back to the place in which we're in within the Media Lab. I highly encourage all of you, when you have a moment, to do a quick search about the Media Lab, just contextually. And I just want to share with you this one, in essence, a mission statement from the Media Lab. The role of the place in which you're situated is to actively promote a unique, anti-disciplinary culture that goes beyond known boundaries and disciplines, encouraging the most unconventional mixing and matching of seemingly disparate research areas, and it creates disruptive technologies that happen at the edges, pioneering such areas as wearable computers, tangible interfaces, and effective computing. And it goes on to explain that. And again, the focus being the margins, but I think it's important to remember as we talk about the evolution of new cultures, and the next panel, which Heather will introduce momentarily, is about pushing our own boundaries. And my last piece, which was actually brought to my attention from somebody who is not at MIT, are the principles that ground the work that's being done here. And so as we collectively continue to shape our own field, I think it's pause for reflection to look to, again, other disciplines, other constructs to determine, I think we relate to many of what's on this screen here. So again, this is online, but, and I'm seeing this for the first time in the past 2 days as well, but without going through each one, I think we need to, again, look to examples from other places. And I thought this notion of disruptive technologies and anti-disciplinary culture was a perfect introduction to the panel that Heather's about to introduce. So thank you. Heather.
So in the interest of time, I'll just get right to introducing all of our panelists. First, we have our thought leader and moderator for the day, which is Professor Bill Clark. He's the Harvey Brooks Professor of International Science, Public Policy, and Human Development at the Harvard Kennedy School. His area of research really focuses on sustainability as science and understanding the interactions between human and environmental systems with a view towards advancing sustainable development. He's particularly interested in how institutional arrangements affect the linkage between knowledge and action. That's what we like, action, in sustainability arena. He also co-heads up the university's sustainability science program. He's on the editorial board of the Proceedings of the National Academy. He's won more prizes and awards than I can name, including many teaching awards. We're delighted to have him. Also on the panel, we have Dr. Tom Kelly, who's the founding director of the UNH Sustainability Institute and chief sustainability officer. He's the co-editor and co-author of The Sustainable Learning Community, One University's Journey to the Future. And he's been working in the field for over 20 years. Jason Jay, he's the director of the Sustainability Initiative at MIT Sloan, the business school here. And he teaches on leadership, strategy, and innovation for sustainable business. And he works with students, alumni, and hands-on projects, and leading companies and organizations, as well as NGOs, government. He works with everyone. And his own research focuses on how people navigate the tensions inherent in their quest for sustainability as they simultaneously pursue their own self-interest and flourishing of human and other life. Next, we have Gordon Jones from Harvard. He's the director of the Harvard Innovation Lab. He is the founding director. He's been there since 2011. And Gordon has a wealth of experience for the last 20 years in senior roles with startups, mid-sized companies, and Fortune 500 companies across multiple industries. He is a wealth of knowledge. And last, we have Tina Bratrich, the director of ETH Sustainability. She's been there since October of 2008 in this position. She reports directly to their president, and she works on interdisciplinary research and applied projects on the topic of sustainability, as well as interactions with interest groups in business, politics, and NGO. So with that, I turn it over to Professor Clark.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, everybody, for having me. I am delighted to be here, catching up with a lot of you whose work I've been following with huge amounts of interest. I'm a scholar of sustainability. It is certainly true that for the vast majority of the last 20 years, the cutting edge of sustainability work has been you folks rather than us folks, or the part of each of you folks that is in the action world of actually doing things, rather than the part of all of us that are basically studying it. So it was a little bit daunting once I had, how can you not accept an invitation from Heather? It's an entirely costly venture. But having agreed to come here, I said, yeah, but virtually everything I know in this drill, I learned from the people in the room. So this could end up being a really boring conversation. Having gone back and forth with Heather and Jacqueline and others in the Harvard group, what I turned to do was try to take us back a step from the stuff that is the everyday agendas of all of us who spend some or all of our time working in the trenches trying to move better practices, procedures, buildings, operations along to approach sustainability, to take a deep breath and help us remind ourselves what it is we're doing this stuff for. In other words, perhaps this may apply to the entire conference, but it certainly applies to a session on innovation. I mean, innovation is so utterly cool and current and so forth. And you can practice it at every level, from the widget up to reforming the university and the governance structures in which we work. It's easy simply to get blown away, sitting in the MIT Innovation Lab, blown away by all the neat things that's going on. And I have nothing against that. I enjoy, dabbling and being a voyeur on that neat stuff. But it does pay, at least I find in my own work, to sometimes take a step back and say, title of this talk, innovation for what? Let's be sure that we are keeping our eye on the ball of what we're ultimately trying to accomplish, rather than being carried away by the exhilaration and momentum of what we found we know how to do and what the next puzzle in the box is. And that's as true for academics as it is for mechanical innovators, as it is for policy and organizational wonks. I can actually make this work in principle. I can. Okay, so I'm going to put 3 propositions for discussion on the table and hope to say something to basically not tell you what to think, but to get you thinking about some issues I'd then like to drive this session around. First one is the obvious thing, that thanks to you and your colleagues, sustainable campus initiatives have made substantial progress in all sorts of areas over the last 10, 20 years. Most obviously, greenhouse gas reductions, green buildings, greening of campuses, et cetera, and so on. And that's great, and it needs to continue in all sorts of forms. That said, that the depth and amount of energy required in these initial efforts means that many campuses, certainly including my own, have not fully engaged with the broader perspectives on sustainability that have slowly bubbled up out of the start-behind world of academic scholarship on sustainable development, have now been building up some momentum and some internal cohesion, even to the extent that now we see multiple corporations, universities, international organizations that actually have a response to the standard cavil, which was, sustainability, it's anything you want it to mean. It's just another word for whatever that person didn't want. So there's been real progress in this arena of conceptualizing frameworks that actually connect sustainable development as a set of socially, politically determined goals, globally down to locally at campus and individual levels, through what is it that makes some trajectories lead us to more sustainable development and some to less, down to underlying determinants of it. And what I want to do is spend my little bit of time today suggesting at least one of those frameworks and asking us to use it as one of the multiple templates against which we ask the question, sustainability, innovation for what? The argument is basically it's time to bring these broader 10,000 meter perspectives back into contact with the operational work from which they have learned so much, but which I think finally they actually have something to contribute, and get that dialogue operating on, especially on campuses, a little more closely and seamlessly between what we do in the field on a given day of making things work better, and how we think about the job that we're involved in and the challenges ahead. Okay, so back to the future. Innovation for what? Well, duh. One answer is innovation for sustainable development. This, of course, is the famous World Commission on Environment and Development, 1987, the so-called Brundtland Commission. And I know many of you could recite this by heart, but the crucial lines from there are: environment's where we live, development is what we all do in attempting to improve our lot on that abode. The two are inseparable. Humanity has the ability to make development sustainable, to ensure that it meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, as a blueprint for what to do tomorrow morning, that was a tad vague, but it has the amazing advantage, and it truly is amazing. This was done by a commission of a largish number of senior people who involved no engineers or scientists, who were all serious players in the political and corporate world, who traveled through the world, from villages to capital cities to international organizations, trying to see what it was that people thought was missing in this issue of advancing development that could be sustainable. In other words, it was a big political process, in the best sense of the word, that one toys with at one's high risk. Even more so, it's unlike the other 10 great new ideas of the 1980s. It's one that is still with us today. And that it's crucial, I think, that we appreciate this thing has gone through 3 global summits involving more international leaders than any other topic on the agenda: security, poverty alleviation, public health, and the like, from the original one in Rio in '92 through Johannesburg 2002 through Rio +20 just behind us. Each time, though there were thousands upon thousands of innovations, of new ideas, of new ripples put on the table, this core idea of meeting the needs of people in the present without compromising the ability of people in the future to meet their own needs has stayed central to it. Many folks around the world have found it irresistible to tinker with that and say, well, yeah, that's what they said, but really what sustainability ought to mean is environmental sustainability. In other words, turn this into an environmental protection agenda. Or financial sustainability, turn it into my corporation should continue forever. Or X, Y, and Z sustainability, simply hijacking a popular and at least not offensive agenda to meet their own narrow needs. Not really a problem, except that it has resulted in all manner of confusion, and it has given fuel to the people who would just like to dismiss the issue altogether. So what I think the important thing to emerge out of this is we as academics or as operations people don't just get to change at will a now 25-ish year internationally, globally debated, politically and corporately sanctioned consensus on what this game is all about. So what this game is all about is not greening Harvard or MIT or anybody else. It's about something like the current jargon coming out of academia, which, as I say, is now finally beginning to catch up, the World Bank, the International Human Dimensions of Global Change Program, and scores of other operations who have been trying to think systematically about a framework that would encompass what all you people do, what farmers in the poorest part of the world do, what corporate boards are trying to do. Something about sustainable development being about inclusive well-being of humans. Well-being being, how are you doing today? Inclusive being, how are you doing, and are you doing as well as you are at the cost of somebody on the other side of the world who you're shipping your wastes to, or at the cost of people in the future who you're burdening with greenhouse gases or a depleted ozone layer or scores of poorly protected nuclear wastes. Inclusive well-being that across and within generations, and the thing that then captures this central issue of the Brundtland Report, of our 20 years of political negotiations, being some notion of aggregate inclusive well-being that doesn't decline through time. What does that mean? It means think of it in terms of an aggregate of the well-being of individual people, all of you in this room, all of you in this community, all of you in the planet now, the well-being of all of you tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, and up through the generations. So that's a bunch of 7+ well-being estimates today, and another 7 well-being next year, and another 8 billion as we go forward, and aggregating those up across generations. So that's the notion of inclusive well-being. What makes it sustainable is that that aggregate doesn't decline through time. That is, we're not buying well-being now at the consequences of a well-being of future generations that is lower than ours. And that sort of is obvious. It is merely a spinning out, I would argue, of the Brundtland agenda. Now, what is this well-being we're talking about? Well, its constituents obviously need to be defined by people in specific contexts. Any two of you in this room will define your own well-being differently in terms of different weights on health or wealth or environmental amenities and how much you like having green that you can walk around in. So it has to be something that is context specific. Most generally, I think the work of Amartya Sen arguing that well-being is best seen as capabilities, as your freedom and capacity to shape the world, to be the one you want to be in. But specifically, its attributes defined by people like you. So that's not a problem. This happens to be the set of attributes that the OECD came up with, interviewing tens of thousands of people throughout the OECD countries, coming up with those dimensions or constituents of well-being as ones that came up over and over again, and then determining that different countries weighted them differently. Some, like America, sadly put huge emphasis on wealth. Others put it in life satisfaction, work-life balance, and the like. So there's nothing in this notion of well-being that suggests some cosmic, it's the same for everybody notion. It disaggregates right down to the level of individuals, but interestingly can aggregate up as well. So human well-being with constituents like these, but maybe different in different campuses, different communities, different cultures around the world. So prodding a bit, as the first, I have 2 questions coming out of this innovation for what? Here's the first one. For the campuses you represent, what are the most important constituents of human well-being explicitly considered in the sustainable development plans of your university? Now, there's everywhere somebody says, we're doing this in order to advance sustainable development. Substitute in that sustainable development, oh, well, we mean inclusive human well-being across generations, within generations. What components, what constituents would that have that this community thinks is particularly important? And my first thing would be, now think about that for the one you come from. And when you go back home with a set of notes on this, I would urge you to do what we are laboriously trying to work through in our own agenda here at Harvard, which is, yikes. We actually haven't talked about a lot of those things. We've been taking for granted that you'd recognize sustainable development if you saw it. This is a device and a heuristic to say, what are we trying to promote? It certainly isn't just reduction in emissions of something or other. What are we trying to promote to make this university campus we work in and the communities dependent on it, from the actual cities or urban areas that surround us up through the rest of the globe, what are the constituents of well-being that concern us, and how are we, as we think about, is this the right thing to do or that the right thing to do? Is this innovation what we most need or that one? How are we thinking about that in terms of payoff across these dimensions, not just for us, but for us taking into account the positive or negative impacts we may have on others around the world today, and the positive or negative impacts we may have, as best we can tell, on people in the future. Okay, so that's the first one, and I hope everyone will come down with it. Second, so innovation to enhance human well-being. So how would we think about that? My argument is that it really ought to target well-being's ultimate determinants. That is, what is it we seek, as the Brundtland Commission said, to pass on uncompromised to future generations? Well, it's pretty clear, as soon as one frames it that way, these needs to be stocks of assets, green buildings or good buildings, trained people and the like. It can't be flows. Think of the example, if you were, do I have that down? Yeah, if you're a factory and you want to know how much is this factory worth to a future buyer, you're not actually going to tell them about how many widgets I turned out last year, because you may have been doing that at the cost of running the factory down, not amortizing it, not reinvesting in it. You want to know about how good a production machine is the factory, how renewed have its capital constituents been, how energy efficient is it, and so on. Similarly, with farmland, again, think of it as what's the value of a piece of farmland to the future. It's not what yields of corn it got today. It is rather its capacity in terms of soils, their richness, their depth, and so on, to produce yields of corn or other things all the way into the future. For greenhouse gases, it's not the emissions rates. It is somehow the capacity of the atmosphere to hold a certain amount of greenhouse gas equivalents without resulting in things we don't like happening, and so on and so on. So for sustainable development, what we ought to be thinking about as what we're doing innovation to enhance is this underlying set of assets, of the fundamental assets we're passing on to the future, and their somehow social value. How useful is that piece of farmland, piece of factory, piece of nature going to be to people in the future? Less useful than it was to us, or more useful? Less useful because we've downgraded it, more useful because we've invested creatively with innovation in it. So which stocks of assets? The way that the thinking on this has evolved is into 5 of them. Obviously, manufactured capital, our housing stock, electricity generating capacity, and so on. A lot of us came into this from the ecological side, so we think of the natural capital part, which is, as I referred to, the capacity of our atmosphere to absorb things, the biodiversity we can draw on for pest control and new drugs and so forth, capacity of the ozone layer to shield us from UV light, and so on. All of those are stock measurements, not flow measurements. That's what the future ought to be asking us. What are you handing on to us? More of this stuff or less of it? Okay? Human capital, size of the population of people you've got to be smart, to think up innovations, their distribution around the community, their health and their education, things that groups like the World Bank have measured forever, but not usually thought of in terms of sustainable development. Obviously, it's something we're in the business of doing in universities. Social capital, the values and norms, the laws and institutions we build up, in this case particularly those regarding norms and values regarding giving a fair shake to the future, and so forth and so on, and trust in them. That is, that they're not just paper laws, but they're ones people actually believe will have binding power on individuals. And knowledge capital, that is the social knowledge, the stuff that doesn't disappear if you or you go away tomorrow, but is sitting there in books, in patents, in culture. It is, in essence, the capacity to innovate, which is how this whole drill links to our shop. So the second question is, on your campus, what are the specific capital assets most relevant to enhancing the inclusive well-being of your community, both locally, surrounding, and the world? How well do you monitor and report on the size and quality of those asset stocks, not just the flows in and out of them, greenhouse gas emissions, waste recycling rates, and so on? All hugely relevant stuff, but not about the stock of assets we are or aren't going to pass on to the future, and therefore, in and of themselves, saying nothing at all about the sustainability of our current practices. It gives us some directions, but it does not tell us, are we going to hand on a campus to the next generation that contributes more or less to well-being? And on which stocks of capital assets do you and don't you focus your efforts to innovate for sustainability? My argument would be, looking from my own university, by almost any assessment of the social value of these multiple capital assets, we invest far too much in the parts that are reducing flow rates into the global climate system, and vastly less than we ought to in a whole bunch of these other dimensions of sustainability, including our capacity to innovate, which is why the focus of this session is so exciting to me. But the point is, this will vary by campuses. Simply saying that I believe we've come to a state where every campus activity should be asking itself those questions. Doesn't say it has to be equal across the assets, doesn't say that the same assets will have priority in any given place, in multiple places. It says that that is now a checklist against a conceptual framework that actually has some content to it, that starts with a set of norms of politically determined what is sustainability about. It's about well-being, denominated in terms of some array of constituents, weighted differently by different groups in different contexts. It is derived from this productive base of society, this human environment system that we have, that is what we draw on to generate well-being in this generation, and a capital base, a set of capital assets we hand on to the future, in which the question is, did that set of assets have more value to future generations or less? And in between, there is the standard stuff we spend so much of our time on, not irrelevantly, but not sufficiently, of the coupling production processes, the flows of goods and services and bads, emissions and the like, and consumption processes that connect that thing we're trying to achieve, integrated, inclusive human well-being, with the underlying assets. I think there are other frameworks you can do. This one is now in use by some of the leading scholars in the field. I'll testify to that. By the World Bank, which is now producing annual nation-scale assessments based on how countries are doing in their array of capital assets, by a number of corporations, by a number of international scholarly organizations, and the like. So it's not the only way to go at these things. I've found it in my own work to be the most intellectually coherent one of beginning to have me not just looking under the lamppost for my own research efforts or my own innovation efforts, but trying to take a coherent picture of where are the different moving parts, what am I trying to achieve, how does what I do relate to those, and am I counting the right stuff? So that's the end of my presentation. This is the set of questions sort of suggested by the organizers and edited slightly by me that we will come back to after my colleagues on the panel have either howled with outrage about what I did or told you what I should have said instead. So thank you for their attention, and I look forward to the commentaries coming up.
Looks very different from up here. I want to say at the outset, well, first I want to thank, just very quickly, the organizers, Heather and Jules, Steve, and others, for the opportunity to be here. In terms of a session organized around innovation, I must admit it makes me a little nervous. The subject, partly for reasons that Bill, I should have anticipated, would outline. But there is a danger that we will assume that we all are talking about the same thing in the same way when we deploy this kind of term that's kind of taken on a madness in the level of use. There's an assumption that it's inherently good and desirable. And in a contemporary context, it's very highly skewed towards the overlaps of science, technology, and corporations. So spin-offs, startups, better, faster, cheaper, et cetera, technology. But it's important to recognize that underlying all these efforts at innovation are a whole set of values. And ethics and culture were raised at the end of the metrics discussion, I think, quite importantly. A whole narrative about who we are, what our place in the world is, what is good, where does the direction for innovation come from? These are the things that don't often enough get called out into the light of day to be looked at critically. So in thinking about innovation, this caught my eye, a Harvard Business Review blog, Why Germany Dominates the US in Innovation. And it said, Germany understands that innovation must result in productivity gains that are widespread rather than concentrated in the high-tech sector of the moment, like the US does. Germany has a network of public institutions that help companies recombine and improve ideas. It's not just about everything new. We have to value what we have and reconfigure it. Germany innovates in order to empower workers and improve their productivity, to create and sustain good jobs across the spectrum of workers' educational attainment. So when we talk about innovation in Germany, it's a different conversation than talking about innovation in the United States, and I imagine in many other places. So it's very contextual, very contextual. Here's another innovation that caught my eye. A Dutch company launches new generation urban wind turbines. These are to go on individual houses, and combined with solar panels could make individual residences completely energy independent on renewable energy. But what I really loved about this, as much as I love the gadget, is that the company built and reinvented formulas drawing on the principles of Archimedes. And to me, there's a very important story there, that there is a valuing of history. There is a valuing of legacy. And in this rush to innovate that so often devalues everything that's past, including yesterday, the cultural domain, again, is so vital to be inspired and find inspiration in the past, the great storehouse of human experimentation and insight, and then adapt it to a new setting and have relevance, Here's another one that caught my eye, but I have to say it makes me very nervous. And this is portrayed as innovation, and it's a large-scale collaborative lab, global development lab that USAID is initiating. And it's got all the language that's in today. It's going to bring together diverse partners to discover, test, and scale breakthrough solutions to achieve what human progress has only now made possible. And it's worth noting that there are 32 cornerstone partners to this lab, including Cargill, Cisco, DuPont, GlaxoSmithKline, Microsoft, as well as the National Academy of Sciences and MIT. The amount of power in that collection that is going to be aimed at the poor in Africa and other places is most unsettling, most unsettling. This is the final one I wanted to share, which is, I think, perhaps the most important example that I could share with you in terms of innovation. This is the cover story from the Atlantic Monthly for this month. And it's a remarkable innovation. It's a rhetorical innovation that has taken history, historical facts, curated them, woven them into an argument that pivots on reparations for slavery. It's not a new idea, but it's framed and presented and argued in a most compelling way. And it is on the verge of changing how we talk about race and racism in the United States. It has the potential, because of its framing, for the United States to possibly tell the truth to itself about how slavery underpinned the imperfect democracy that we have built. And if we can do that, if we can actually live up to our history, the impact on sustainability, not just in the United States, but far beyond the United States, will be significant. 3 minutes till the next part. Yeah. So what I wanted to say then is, so if we can agree that context matters, and if we can agree that there are many dimensions of innovation, then this robust notion of sustainability offers us a context, a very important context with which to think about and pursue innovation. And Bill did, of course, a very nice job in laying that out. So for me, it's the most robust form that does not fit on the frame. Rhetorically, what we've done in our work is to try to disrupt the jargon of what is sustainability. We've asked instead, what sustains us as human communities? And by sustain, we don't mean just survive, but flourish. How do we flourish as complex cultural beings? And that has proved to be an effective tool in engaging people in a very broad and integrated way. We've then taken that idea and framed it to try to operationalize much of what Bill was talking about in terms of history. And we've organized it in an interactive framework that is looking at climate and energy, biodiversity and ecosystems, food systems, and culture. And understanding sustainability to lie at the intersection of those interacting systems, and that we need to sustain the integrity of all of those systems simultaneously. So I want to just give you some concrete examples in this final minute or two from food systems on our campus. We began back in 2000. I can't tell you the context, I don't have time, but there was divestment from food and agriculture going on. We convened, stakeholders, academics, everybody around the future of the food system in our region. 2 citizens panels on the future of food, and a symposium on eating as a moral act. We started a state farm-to-school program to connect local farms to local schools. Sounds like a common sense thing. It was a pretty radical idea when it started. We established the first certified organic ground on the campus, which immediately brought students almost up out of the soil to create an organic garden club. We worked with our dining services to create a local harvest initiative, which looked at local and regional procurement, as well as celebratory, symbolic meals and dinners. I'm going to skip that one for now. We established the first organic dairy research farm at a university in the United States. New England has been losing its family dairy farms for decades. It's a vital part of the working landscape. It's part of that capital that Bill is talking about. We gave Carlo Petrini an honorary degree for his work in slow food, for his intellectual and political leadership. And as a result of related activities, again, convening, established an undergraduate dual major in eco-gastronomy, linking sustainable agriculture, cuisine, food entrepreneurship, and nutrition. We convened workshops to take what had become the loss of agronomists in the faculty and to connect the large number of very active ecologists into an agroecological framework to bring ecology and agriculture together for the students, for the faculty, and the like. The eco-gastronomy program began in 2008, a very major initiative with a very highly regarded ecologist, John Aber, sort of signaled the complete shift over to an agro-ecosystem framework. That now has a legacy and an intellectual and capital. I'll skip over this. This is a part of the legacy, Bill. I was thinking of this in terms of capital. This, from all of this effort, resulted a cluster hire of faculty that work together across sustainable ecosystem management and sustainable agriculture. It signaled a complete reversal of the divestment in the institution in terms of faculty resources and infrastructure around food systems. By 2010, a major undergraduate major that now exists in sustainable agriculture and food systems, and then a major regional effort, which if I had more time, I would talk a lot about, called Food Solutions New England, that's looking across the region. But I'll have to talk about that another time. But it involves a long-term vision going out to 2060 for for the region, and about spending the time to build connectivity, alignment, and not just obsess on action, but understand that building trust amongst people is action. Talking about the right things and raising the right questions is action. The opposite of action isn't talk, it's inaction. So we have to talk about the right things. Finally, my last slide, I'll just say in all of this urgency, particularly in light of innovation and startups and spin-offs, Festina lente is another ancient piece of wisdom which says to hasten slowly. We have to embrace the paradox. We have to be humble in our claims of knowledge and know-how and go forward in a way that respects the intergenerational ethical obligations bill that you outlined. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here, and also I thank the organizers. I'm Gordon Jones from the Harvard Innovation Lab. I think I'd like to center my remarks a little bit around giving you some insight into the work that we're doing and tell you a little bit about what we do and how we focus and how it might apply in this overall theme of sustainability. So I think I'm coming primarily from that of a little more of a viewpoint of the operator, the person looking to find where are we able to nurture many of these ideas and insights that are born out of the research, out of the classroom, and really help them get traction and growth. So the story of the Harvard Innovation Lab, I think if I had to summarize it in one short sentence, if I was given 15 seconds to tell you about it, I would tell you that we're about ultimately taking individuals who have insight and ideas and helping them develop the skills they require to scale those ideas with a strong consideration for viability, economic viability. And I'll tell you a little more about how we do that, but first let me tell you about how we came to be. Because I think a little bit, the organization of the Harvard Innovation Lab is also unique. We are 2.5, we've just closed our 3rd academic year in existence. And it was really, the impetus was, if we trace it back, there was an article written by a faculty member at Harvard in collaboration with a faculty member at MIT, George Whitesides and John Deutsch, and I believe it was Nature magazine in 2008, in which they were primarily focused on challenging their peers in academia to answer the big so what questions. Where is your research applied? How can you answer where the importance of that research applies to today's problems? And that got a number of people around Harvard, with some other factors included I won't go into, to say, where can we also nurture the individual student journey? I'm defining students as 18-year-old freshmen at university through postdocs. Where can these individuals have the opportunity to apply the learning that they are getting in that classroom? Much of the foundational insights that faculty members bring, how can that be brought alongside these students? For a variety of reasons today, this is tremendously helpful and attractive. You have costs of technology lowered. Individuals are able to really put into place and actually embody the ideas they may have generated more quickly today than they were 10 years ago, or for that matter, even 5 years ago. So that led to the creation of an idea, a germ of an idea. What if we were to create not just a place, but a set of resources that enabled individual students to apply the learning that they have? And so we have this guiding framework that says every student should have the opportunity to apply the ideas that they're learning. And not only do that, but like many folks, a lot of what all of us, I think, are talking about is how can individual stakeholders be collaborating? We all have insights from our own points of view. But the special sauce was, I think, in the design of the Innovation Lab was, how do we do this across this whole university of Harvard? And more broadly, where are we porous to enable other individuals to be collaborating? Because it's foundational in our view that interdisciplinary collaboration, many of the problems we're talking about that are framed up here by my colleagues and others, require multiple disciplines in the effort to pursue innovative solutions. And so what Harvard has said is, let's put that together in a single space, in a single set of resources, so that interdisciplinary collaboration, where public policy, where business, where science, where the liberal arts environment and humanities can come together and be working, if nothing else, shoulder to shoulder, because we think good things happen when individuals are rubbing shoulder to shoulder, working on the ideas and insights that they have. One of the themes, if you haven't already drawn from what I'm saying, is that the Innovation Lab is not set up against a singular theme or vertical. In fact, we think it's a more evergreen model. We are assembling the kinds of resources and the skills that come alongside those with insights that they'll need, because anybody can come up with an idea for how I might, or a technological insight. I have a team right now that has an algorithm that tells you where on your body your smartphone is at any time. Left pocket, right pocket, whether it's out. And they come into an innovation lab and say, what do I do with that? Now, A, they're brilliant, but B, there's a lot of places you can apply that. I could think of a million things. I had another student who came in with facial recognition software. He can tell you, he can take a photo and determine with 90x% accuracy that who those people are if he has some reference point. Lots of applications. That's not, I would argue, that's half the puzzle. The ability to then understand where can it be applied, what are the skills that I need in collaboration with many others, able to take that germ of an idea, that flame of an idea, and bring it to scale with an economic viability consideration so that I can bring that hopefully innovative and hopefully sustainable solution to the broadest audience possible so those individuals can experience it in a way. Because it's not as difficult, I would argue, to bring to a single group nearly as much as it is to bring it to scale. So this cross-university interdisciplinary environment, we do 4 things in the Innovation Lab. We do foundational learning. We partner with faculty like Bill and others who will be teaching entrepreneurship and innovation from their own disciplines. We have a physical 30,000 square foot facility that has within it a classroom, and we have faculty teaching from around Harvard University, many of whom ironically don't know of each other. Maybe it's not ironic, maybe it's totally understandable. But the chance for those faculty members to also meet each other is an added benefit. But what we find is that classroom is where the flames of these ideas come. And they then can roll out into a whole suite of resources that help them refine ideas, validate that those really have markets. I see a lot of people solving problems that don't exist or don't have a market for. My kids asked me the other day, I have 4 kids, a 5-year-old, asked me, he said, Dad, how do you make money? I said, well, geez, this is one of these moments where you're saying to yourself, I'm setting the trajectory for this human being's life on how I answer this. And I basically ended up saying to him, the simplest answer I could give my 5-year-old was, try to find a problem that somebody's willing to pay you for. Now, I have more time to introduce sustainability and other things into this, but I think if you start to bring in some rubric, again, that's still dangerous, what my answer was, but at the same time, it helps frame what I hope is somebody who's willing to not always be focused on following the path of least resistance, which I think is what I was attempting to do. But with that, there's a lot of themes I see in the Innovation Lab, and around certainly sustainability, there's a number of efforts in the Innovation Lab around urban design, food systems, global health, energy. We certainly go beyond that, but there are teams right now that are working on smoothing out the world's consumption of food sources. When I read that there's a very select number of fish in the ocean that the Western diet is eating at any restaurant, and half of what, and I'm quoting statistics I can't necessarily back up, but run with me, half of what's caught in the ocean by commercial fishermen gets thrown away as bycatch because it may not be attractive, but it's perfectly edible. Those kinds of things are concerning to students. They're the kinds of things that iLab helps support. So we have teams working on bringing food sources from other parts of the world to the Western diet in the United States, things like crickets or mealworms, superfoods they're sort of working on, to taking CryoSite, doing frozen fertilized fish eggs and helping smooth out how we do aquaculture. Lots of teams doing other things. In VirtueDent is bringing virtual oral care to many parts of the world where there is no oral care, and we know that the mouth is an entry point to the bloodstream. Significant health issues come from that. We've had, let me roll it up to you because I'm going to finish my remarks now. In 2.5 years, we finished our 3rd year, I should say. We've had over 439 teams come through a 100-day incubation. These are 439 teams representing over 3,000 students. open to collaboration with other members of the community here in Boston and beyond, who we think we're getting earlier, helping them develop their skills sooner. And for those that really do want to run with it, they're able to take those ideas farther. 439 teams. We know that a number of them have raised over $100 million in backing. Some of that may be grant money. Some of them may be solving intractable problems. Some of them may be working with a for-profit model. We work across all of those. But I'll conclude my remarks with that. And I would also, the last thing I would just say to you all is, please also bring action to the work you're doing. Think about what maybe you've heard from me say, what you've heard me say about the iLab to your own campuses. What role do you play? Are you a first customer? Are you an incubator? Are you a resource to helping guide them to other resources? We all play a role in this, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Are we still in the morning? Oh, it's exactly noon. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jason Jay. I teach at the Sloan School of Management, and I'm the director of the Sustainability Initiative there. I got my start thinking about sustainability from an action perspective on the campus, working on campus sustainability as a graduate student. I came to MIT in 2005, was a PhD student at the Sloan School working on organizational behavior, and I thought, well, if I'm not going to understand anything about organizational behavior unless I start meddling around in a real organization around things I care about. So I got involved in campus sustainability efforts, which had to do with closing fume hoods and behavior change. You'll see these greening MIT stickers around revolving doors on campus. And we created something called the MIT Generator, which got students coming together and coming up with ideas for greening the campus, essentially. Putting a camera on one of the buildings that could detect when people had left their lights on at night, and then giving them an email the next morning. Stuff like that. So I very much, in my development, had the campus as a living laboratory and as a context for learning and experimentation. I want to circle back to that at the end of my talk here, because I think that that's the role that all of you can play, is to provide a context for the development of innovators on university campuses. But now, in my role at the Sloan School, I have to think about more generally, not just my own experience, but how do we develop innovative people? So if we think about that human capital stock of capability that Bill laid out, how do we actually develop people who are capable of innovating for sustainability? And I have come to think of this as just sort of a very simple three-step process. The first step is get people sensitized to the basic issues and opportunities of sustainability. Get them thinking about how our economy is part of our society, which is part of our environment, and if we blow up the outer rings, the inner rings die with them. So just getting people the basic orientation to thinking about sustainability. But then very quickly, what we try to do is we try to get them experiencing and understanding the current state of technology and practice, sort of the cutting edge. And the way that we try to do that is through something that we call action learning. And action learning is where we teach, where we in a class, we take students, we have them form teams, and we have them working on real problems with real organizations. So I teach a course called SLab, or Laboratory for Sustainable Business, and this year we had 14 projects. This is the sampling of organizations over the last 2 years that have hosted projects for our students, very gratefully so. And they range across all different industries and sectors. There are heavy industrial companies, like Boeing or Union Pacific, or Toyota. There are consumer-facing companies or consumer products companies like Natura or Unilever. There are NGOs like the Environmental Defense Fund. And essentially what we get students working on is, okay, how are you thinking about sustainability, and what would it take to push the envelope within your organization? And the problems are framed by the companies, and what that allows us to do is very quickly go to what is the edge of knowledge, of practical knowledge, of in-practice knowledge, because it's the puzzles that the companies are wrestling with. And a lot of the stuff is very much what you would imagine working on as the kind of the incremental improvement of, how can we how can we design our packaging to reduce the amount of materials use or greenhouse gas emissions across the life cycle of the product? How can we create a new a new product category for a more sustainably produced and healthier snack bar at Mars. Questions like that that aren't necessarily game-changing, but they at least expose students to understanding where are we at in terms of businesses' ability to move forward on sustainability. But then what we have to do is we have to think about pushing the envelope. And we have to think about developing students to go beyond where the current edge of practice is to being innovators. And one of the themes that has come out in both Tom and Bill's remarks is that innovation is not just about technology. It's not just about the widgets and gizmos. When we think about innovation, and I'm just going to provide this framework because this might be useful in the broader context, is we want to think about innovations in products. And that's a lot of the examples that Gordon described from the iLab are things that are going to become products. But as importantly as that, we want to be developing students who can do innovations in management processes or practices. And that's what a lot of you are actually involved in, is what are the clever new ways that we can manage campus sustainability. Both products and processes are embedded within business models. So we want to get students thinking about new kinds of business models. Robin Chase is a graduate of our program who started Zipcar. Zipcar is a business model that allows people to use cars when they want them rather than own them. And there's all kinds of interesting things that happen as a result. A well-shared car takes 15 cars off the road. So that's a business model that, as it grows, potentially reduces certain aspects of impact of the vehicle system. That is in turn embedded in innovation that we need to do in our market infrastructures and institutions. The cap and trade systems, the labeling or certification systems, the things that are going to affect whether business models can be viable or not. And that in turn is embedded in what I'm going to call cultural and lifestyle innovation, which is really thinking about new ways of living and working, and new values and new narratives that we can create in our culture that makes it possible for us to consider market or institutional or policy innovations that can change this game. And my perspective when it comes to this question about, well, okay, great. So I'm trying to develop innovators who are going to go create, sort of the next Zipcar, or who are going to create the next, cap and trade system, or the next, renewable energy technology. But what role does the campus play? And what role does the kind of work that you do play? Well, I think that it happens in a couple of. I think it's particularly relevant at the levels of management process or practice innovation, and at the level of culture and lifestyle. And the reason I say that is because the campus, seeing how the campus is run, seeing the rhythms of action, the rhythms of how we live, where we put what kind of waste in what kinds of bins, all of those create a set of habits that students will be going out and having in their lifestyle. The dialogues that we have about the future of food, for example, at UNH, help shape the culture and values that they're going to be going out into the world with, and are going to shape the kinds of innovations that they even consider doing in the first place. So it's partly about what we embody in our management practices on campuses, as well as the kind of inquiry and the kind of culture that we're creating on our campuses. These other levels are probably going to happen more in the curriculum, they're going to happen more in the internships, they're going to happen more in the iLabs, but they're going to be powerfully informed by what we do on the campuses. So I just wanted to kind of provide this as a broad understanding of the kind of innovation that might lead towards the transformations of those critical stocks of capital and flows that Bill described. So what I try to do is carry people through this developmental process of understanding the basic issues, getting in touch with the current state of practice with real practitioners. And that can include having the MIT campus be a host for projects, right? Having Julie Newman's office be a host for SLab projects. But then we've got to get people pushing the envelope and innovating. The way that I do that, I've got 0 minutes left. So the way that I do that on campus is by infusing sustainability into the curriculum at MIT Sloan, by holding events of various kinds throughout the year, by having elective courses on sustainability, by having a sustainability certificate that is available to all master's level students around MIT, by getting students involved in a leadership group around our whole sustainability initiative, so that at whatever level of depth students want to get involved in, they can wade into the waters as deeply as they want to go. And I think that's also something that I've found, that may be a useful idea, is think about what is more peripheral participation and what is more central participation by students look like in your campus sustainability efforts as you're developing them as innovators.
Yes, in this case, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have got probably the worst slot now because you're all hungry. But I'm nevertheless happy to tell you something about our Swiss perspective on drivers for innovation to support sustainable development. Well, at least according to our experience, this innovation process to support sustainability needs to build on at least 3 principles, and I would like to summarize them in 3 keywords. It's bridging, it's integrating, and it's focusing. And we've already heard quite some interesting aspects according to this. And, well, repeating what I've said before, bridging various disciplines, departments, and cultures in a broader way of cultures is essential to create an environment where innovation can happen. And this environment depends strongly at our universities, depends strongly on the institutional settings, on the institutional support. And it also depends strongly, and I think this is a key element, it depends strongly on the individual engagement of several key persons who are really able and willing to drive the scene and to make a change. And I'm pleased to tell you that we are in a very privileged position at ETH Zurich because sustainability is a priority at the highest level of decision making. So, like Heather said, our office and me, we are reporting directly to the president. But another key issue is, and I think this might be even more important, our steering board is broadly anchored in faculty. So we have 8 faculty members who are coming from 7 different departments and from various scientific disciplines. And this probably creates already a situation like my former speaker said, this kind of inspirational setting when different ideas come together and you have this inspirational steering feeling. Another key element to support innovation for sustainability is integration. And we believe this is key because innovation or this inspirational feeling occurs exactly at the boundaries between different fields of activity. So therefore we have introduced sustainability into all relevant fields of activities. That means we have sustainability integrated in our education programs, in the research activities, in our dialogue with society and with stakeholders, but also, of course, on our daily campus life. And whenever possible, we try to come up with different projects that are integrating at least 2 or more fields of activity. So I will present you some of these examples afterwards. And the third part, or the third principle, which I believe is very essential to trigger innovation processes for sustainability, is focusing. Simply because it's important, if you really like to make a change in the real world, it's important to concentrate your capacities. And we have heard this from Anne this morning. If you spend all your capacity on reporting, you won't have time to create a new innovative process. So therefore, we have chosen this concept of the focus of the year, which is a thematic focus, where we try to bundle all of our activities from research, from education, from campus life on one thematic focus. So that has been future cities, climate change, of course, the world food systems as one year, energy systems, natural resources, and this year we are dealing with future health. So, well, this is quite simple probably, but it really works so that you bring all these people together, that you concentrate your capacities, and that you follow the 3 principles. And I've been asked to present you one real-life program or real-world project. So I would like to do this with one of our examples on the ETH Sustainability Summer School program, which is actually an innovative education program which aims A, to link education and research quite closely, B, to bridge various disciplines, and I mean at least 10 or 15 disciplines within one course, different cultures, different scientific cultures, but also some social cultures. And we, of course, would like to support this annually changing focus of the year on a thematic theme. And just to give you an idea of how this looks like, the major goal of this program is to educate or to enable students to become change agents for sustainability. That means to enable them to make a change in their academic life, but also beyond, in their future career life, but also in their private lives. And to meet this goal, we have designed an inter- and transdisciplinary curriculum where students will be able to, or they will be trained in system thinking, they will gain knowledge in interdisciplinary understandings. We force them and we motivate them to further think critically and self-reflectively, because I think this is a key element for innovation and for sustainability, always to step back and to reflect your own settings, your own knowledge, the settings of your university and so on. And last but not least, and this is an important point, we also force them to gain capacities in transformation knowledge. And that goes a little bit like the iLab or what we have heard from MIT before, so that students will be able to transform their theoretical or their innovative thoughts into real-world prototypes or products. And the whole system is embedded in a kind of a program that should further support motivation and skills that are needed to become a change agent for sustainability, like communication and presentation skills, but also to get in contact with various stakeholders and with international and interdisciplinary teams, for example. 3 minutes, that will be enough. Well, and just one outcome from such a summer school, that was the summer school from 2010. It was a summer school that was held in Addis Abeba on sustainable building construction on the campus of our partner university there. And what has been done is, well, the students gained a variety of theoretical knowledge on sustainable building, on cultural backgrounds, on future city development, on whatever you can think about on the theoretical part. But on the other hand, our students also learned quite some hands-on techniques on, for example, how to build a sustainable building. And the SURU, the so-called SURU, is a sustainable urban dwelling unit, practically a loam house, a two-storied loam house, which has been built on natural resources out of the region. So the students really learned how to build them. They learned how to work together in these interdisciplinary teams, but they also had to learn to work together with the daily workers on the construction site, for example. And finally, they had to think about the whole system. So we had architects, we had engineers, we had water managers and social scientists and economists there. So they had to think about not only this house, but beyond the boundaries, so how to install a water system for the whole system, how to integrate the cultural settings. So in Addis Abeba, you're not building higher houses, the houses are not higher than 2 floors, so how can we integrate a system that will work afterwards and so on. So that was quite an inspirational and an interesting setting in that case. And the outcome looks like this now. So of course this hasn't been finalized in a 3 weeks course, but 1 year after it has been finalized, it triggered further research activities, several publications on the scientific side. So we had actually this kind of cross-inspirational infiltration from science to education and backwards. And it also triggered a follow-up project in the southern urban areas of Addis Abeba. Well, and the last one is, if you think about international and interdisciplinary response to this kind of work, it's nice to see that so far we have reached more than 30 students from 30 universities, almost 30 nationalities, and more than 30 various scientific disciplines. We have worked with more than 40 organizations on various levels, so multinational companies like Nestlé or Syngenta, but also local authorities or NGOs on the smaller scale. So to close up my presentation in the 10 minutes, I believe it's important that innovation for sustainability requires at least 3 points. So competence and inspiration is an essential basis, and this, at least to my understanding, can be gained out of this interdisciplinary and intercultural teams. So it's really important that you bring people together who are able to think about their own boundaries. And integrative thinking is probably the essential part. So to create synergies between research, between education, between our daily life, between our campus life. And last but not least, and I think this is often missing, that well-focused capacities are essential to generate an implementation force. So if we really want to make a change in the real world, and not only in the publication world, so I think we need to focus our capacities to rather smaller activities, but with a larger impact. And last but not least, you need a great team, and this is our team. So we are all working part-time, which is also kind of a sustainable part. Thank you very much.
What we're going to do in that time is have an opportunity for you to pose questions and the panel to respond to the questions to one another and so forth. The way we're going to do that is I'll collect approximately 6 questions from the floor, give any panelist who chooses an opportunity to respond to one of those questions or some cross-cutting theme. That lets them ignore the questions that seem least useful while giving them free latitude to do anything else. I'll let them come back for seconds, but then try to move it quickly to another round of 6 questions from the floor and so on. At the end of the session, so at 12:50 to my friendly timekeeper, we'll stop with the back and forth, and I'll give the panelists each 1 minute to give a last word. And if you are shorter than 1 minute, we get food quicker. So whatever you wish. And then I will turn it over to Heather to close things out at the end. So that's the basic drill. What I'm going to do is, these were the slightly modified set of the questions that the organizers proposed might be interesting for this question to pursue. Obviously, some of them have been more intensively addressed than others in the comments to date. I don't mean them to be confining to what you want to raise here, simply suggestive of the sorts of things that went into the planning of this venture. What I am going to do to provide some structure is run the first half of this question and answer period, break the question and answer period into 2 parts. The first half, unless we just run out of steam, I would like you to focus on the question of innovation for what? That is, looking on the presumption that our goal is broadly sustainable development. This is not about innovation in general. It's about innovation to promote sustainable development. If our goal was broadly sustainable development, whether in the terms I defined or others did or you do, what are our biggest substantial, substantive needs for getting better, for innovation, for finding new ways of doing things we're doing now? And I just want us to differentiate there. There are some places we are obviously on pretty good innovation tracks. We're getting better and better and better each year. We're building up capacity and so on. What I'm going to invite people to do is think broadly, either for their own campuses or society more generally, where do we desperately need to learn to do things better, and we don't seem to be doing it. And having established in the first half of our questions some interesting, I hope, back and forth on that sustainability or innovation for what, we want to then turn the second half of the period into how are we going to do it? What kind of changes in the campus programs you all run would be the most important ones in order to empower, release, energize, not innovation in general, not even innovation for sustainability in general, but innovation on these really hard parts, the ones that are urgent and for whatever reasons we're lagging behind relative to the places in which we've seen real progress being made. Okay? So I will try to keep time on that, and let me with that open the floor to people here. And as you get up, say who you are and where you're from.
Thanks. I'm David Spluckard. I'm with the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And it was fascinating to hear it was interesting that all 4 of you were really talking about student-focused projects, and really kind of your attention is towards the students, which is great. And at some point, maybe you could talk a little bit more about if there's an expansion into the community and some other things that we've been thinking about as well. But while we're focusing on students, one of the things that we talk about at my university is what we call the 80-20 rule. There's always about 20% of the students who really will go out of their way. They are interested in sustainability. They think about it, they do it. But then that leaves that 80% of the students, the vast majority, that we have to reach in a different way. And I imagine from listening to your conversation that in innovation, it may be a very similar portion of people who are very self-motivated and, and already have some great ideas, and they've already kind of met you halfway. But then there's probably, well, I guess my question to you is, do you feel like there's also that 80% out there that you're not reaching? And if not, is there a role to try to find another avenue to try to get them involved as well?
Thank you. From the side here.
Thank you. Dave Gorman from Edinburgh University. It's a possibly, I have to stand as well, a possibly unhelpful question or comment, but I agree about the Buntland definition, being the right one, but it talks about needs. It doesn't talk about wants. And I think that we maybe, need to consider that. So we know there are positional goods that really, we want them because it shows that we are a certain place in society. We know about Veblen goods, where because the price goes up, I'll want more of them because, again, it shows my place. We know that there maybe is a level, Bill, you talked about, kind of material capital, but sometimes that material capital is actually making us unwell, unhappy. We know that beyond a certain point in terms of income, people don't really seem to get any happier, and we can accumulate stocks of things that we don't actually want. So when you talked about innovation for what, it struck me in terms of some of the innovation that actually we're innovating in ways that apparently will help within, I think it's Jason's framework in one sense. But actually, when you look more broadly, we don't really need some of this stuff at all. So I wonder whether actually we should be debating that point as well, about stripping back a little bit further to even Max Neef's kind of stuff about interacting and being and friendships and leisure and so on, rather than just going straight into saying that material capital is a unalloyed good. So thank you.
Thank you. Other questions on innovation for what? Of what? God, you all died? Back here.
Kurt Teichert from Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. I guess I want to pick up on a comment Nasli made in the first session, and that goes to rate of change as opposed to a state of being. As I hear this, this reference to the asset stocks, and maybe let's go to knowledge capital, is it important that we understand the rate of change in that knowledge capital? If we use that as a measure, if we're looking as an indicator of how well we're succeeding, is it, and let's just pick on the example of knowledge capital among these stocks, is that rate of innovation, rate of change, doing it carefully, slowly, yet urgently, something that we should be talking about and measuring and comparing our performance and understanding how and why we're doing it well or poorly.
Thank you. Others? Back here.
Ariane König from the University of Luxembourg. Hi, Bill.
Hey.
Long time no see. My question is on innovation, and it relates to pushing boundaries and radical innovation. Where do we need to start reframing to arrive? Well, the metrics session ended on the alarming note that our attempts at changing we're trapped in rebound effects, etc. So my interest from the panel is, what can we do to create new imaginaries about who we are in our place with relation to the environment? Should I quote Bruno Latour on this? He said, no. Okay.
That one was a cleverly phrased sort of what do we need innovation in, but mostly how we do it. So I will take it. The what is new imaginaries, question mark. And then you had some how questions as well, which we can pick up as we go along.
Thanks.
Couple others, and then I will give the panelists a chance to bail us out. Not? Yes, here. Julie.
I just want to hear Tom speak more. Not really, though. No, I mean, one of the pieces that that I want you to no, one of the pieces I want to hear from a little bit more is, I think, something we all struggle with, and actually I think has tied into the past 2 days, is this tension that I think you all touched upon, which is the pace of innovation, and then the pace of innovation, which I think we tend to think is rapid, and the pace at which people actually build trust and relationships and identify common problem sets, and they're not aligned. And I think that came up in many of them. And I just want to pause for a second, because as the organizing committee put innovation on the table, we did it actually for this, exactly for what we're after here, which is, how does it apply to our field? How do we frame it? How do we make sure it captures the normative aspects of innovation as well as the applied aspects of it? So if somebody could speak to that tension, that would be fantastic.
Okay. Last chance, or I'm going to unleash the panel. Okay, the panel is unleashed. Anybody want to respond to any of that? Jason.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on the, I'm going to combine two of the questions, particularly this one about needs versus wants, and consumerism as a problem, right? And are we thinking about needs, or are we thinking about cares or concerns, right? If we think about flourishing. I want to connect it to this 80-20 rule idea, because there are 20%. Let me just go with this premise for a second. I haven't thought through the actual numbers in my context, but let's say that there are 20% of my business students who are interested in sustainability, and I think that's probably about right. And let's say that there are about 20% of them separately who are interested in innovation, who see themselves as innovators, who see themselves as somebody who's going to push the envelope and willing to take risks to do that. If I multiply those two together, that means that I have 4% of my students who are going to be interested in innovation for sustainability, who are really going to want to push the envelope. And actually, that's probably about right. We've probably got 4% of people who are really thinking about an aspiration to really move the needle on the big issues that matter. And within that 4%, I would say there's yet another 20% problem, which is that only 20% of them are thinking about what you raised, which is going beyond the basic paradigm of consumerism. I think that, I showed you that slide of all those big companies that we work with. I mean, that's a conservative influence on the whole conversation, which is that people are looking to do things, to do what they're doing incrementally better, but they're not always questioning what they're doing. They're not saying, now there are exceptions to that, right? Ford is trying to think of itself as a mobility company, not a car sales company. And I think that's, so there are places where that's happening. But if we say that's yet another 20%, that means that, there's a little bit less than 1% of people who are going to be thinking about, this fundamental question about consumption. And I think that, I don't know how to go after that. We raise it with the students. We make it part of our curriculum. We make it part of the dialogue very actively. But I don't think we've created alternative models that are attractive and appealing and inspiring. And I think that's actually one of the basic, I think, contributions of a campus experience as a culture and community, is to create post-consumerist mini civilizations in our value sets and in our way that we live together. And I don't know how to do that, but that's the what for me.
So the second half of the conversation and the answer to how do you do that?
Yes.
Again, let me encourage these comments to be back on where do we need to be doing more innovation or better innovation than we're currently churning out with the machines we've got. And then I want to push us. There's a huge amount of innovation going on out there that is relevant to sustainability. Rather than have us rehearse that, I want to make sure we know what's just being missed, because we don't have the right linkages or whatever, and it's really important. And then we'll come on to some magic trick that lets us stop missing it. Others? Yeah.
I would just point to what was mentioned there, which is the imaginaries and alternative imaginaries. Nothing could be more fundamental to education. Keeping in mind that the original idea of liberal education was to liberate the mind from merely passively accepting what is, but to interrogate the status quo, and what is deemed to be good is upheld, and what isn't is overturned. But that consciousness, that critical consciousness, is in too many ways gotten marginalized on the campus. And there isn't a unified mission and commitment to those underlying principles of what I think of as liberal education. So I think that's a what that we need to recommit to.
Others, those who choose not to give responses now get double time in the next session. Christine?
I'd also like to respond to the 20-80%, and I think you're perfectly right. The 20% are interested, and nevertheless, I think it's not a matter of passiveness. It's not equal to ignorance. So, I mean, in a way, it needs innovation to reach out to the 80%, at least as a future vision. And we've actually realized this. And what we're trying to do now is to upscale, and that's how to do. But it might be allowed to discuss this now. We had quite a good experience with the small-scale courses, with those students who are really engaged, who really want to make a change. And we're now trying to scale it up to reach all students of one kind of bachelor year. So not 150, but 1,500. So it's like at least to provide them the opportunity to get in contact with. Often it's not ignorance. It's often what we realize. It's at least at our system. It's a Bologna system that we are collecting credit points after credit points after credit points. We are completely filled up with the obligatory curriculum, so that they don't get a chance. So what we like to do is to integrate this type of courses into the curriculum as a mandatory course that everybody is forced to at least to join it, and then we will see how this works. But this requires completely different teaching settings. So you need to delegate a certain part of teaching to your assistants. You need to find other ways of kind of designing such courses. So this is innovation itself. So this is probably at the moment lacking, that we are not. Our courses are not designed to reach out to the 100% and to do a 1 week's course which is open to everybody, but this is what we're trying to do now for the next years.
Say something or pass to
Brief comment. I would just, I think, pick up maybe on what I think is a what. It's not necessarily a specific area as much as I continue to believe that the interdisciplinary interaction that can be fostered is an area that universities are uniquely positioned to be implementing. So many other, while there are of course hurdles to that, so many other organizations, certainly in the private sector, I believe, have even greater disincentives for that to be occurring. And so I think that's an area that's, I would suspect around other universities continues to be an opportunity area.
Right. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and pretend I'm a panelist too. Obviously, I'm projecting a little bit of frustration that we can't get down to the specifics. And I think it is something actually that is hurting us across campuses, that we spend a huge amount of time focusing on process and capacity and end up then focusing our innovation and other activities on whatever comes along. Whatever bubbles up. The student has a project, there's a good thing in letting the student do that project. It doesn't necessarily make the biggest contribution to the sustainability agenda. One fact bubbling up out of research on broadly conceived sustainable development across countries, income levels, and so on, is that by far and away, the biggest component, the biggest source of variance in why one country, city, community is doing well and badly is this human capital and essentially the human health component of the capital assets I talked about. For universities, that almost certainly means how well our students feel about themselves and this hectic life they're leading. We have just the beginnings of enough research to suggest that their exposure to greenery, open space, their ability not to feel locked in concrete classrooms with no windows matters almost unbelievably much in terms of creating contented, healthy students and staff and faculty rather than not. we have almost no systematic innovation research going on what kind of different buildings, classroom regimes, eating habits, opportunities, and so on around just around a campus would do to improve that, though it's by far and away the biggest source of variance we see. And there'd be different versions of that for people in cities, people in hospitals, and so on. But I think the kind of debate, discussions we're having in this whole meeting would benefit from people reaching into facts available to them in their campuses and bringing up to the top, why don't we know more about this? Why aren't we encouraging some of those enthusiastic students who come with us ideas to focus on a couple of the areas where the big bangs are? Because I think those are doable, and I don't think all of them are places that profitability and where can we make a buck will drive us. Those can be great things to do, but there's another class of public goods issues and so on no one's ever going to make $1 on, and we desperately need to address those. Go down the list someday. Let me then turn it back to the floor. Floor is now open. Nominally, you're talking about how should we do this, but you're going to talk about whatever you want to. So I will open it up here.
René Schwarzenbach, ETH. This is a question primarily for Tom. And he brought it up. It's the historical view. It's sort of the historical perspective. When I studied chemistry many years ago, the historical perspective was part of my education. It taught me what went wrong, what went right, and how society sort of coped with the development in chemistry. It's not there anymore. It's a waste of time. The professors cannot do it anymore because they don't know it. So my question would be, if we bring the historical perspective into all these different disciplines in the lecture, so we could actually reach the students, and then sort of reflect on how all these developments in the different disciplines have shaped the society or the culture. This might be a way of also reaching the 100% student and not only the 20% student. What is this doable?
Again, I'll collect the set and then turn. Short questions, please, because we are running short on time. Here. And then the next one is there in the back.
I'm Madeline Charney. I'm a librarian at UMass Amherst. I think that innovation is only going to happen down the line for a student. You can't just expect them to catapult into this role as an innovator. So I'm thinking first-year seminars is where you begin. As incoming students learn to tell their own story. I think personal stories are really important. I think as an educator, how many of you are sharing like why it's important to you? And I think back in my years of schooling over the many years, it's the teachers I remember best are the ones that I kind of understood who they were a little bit. And I feel like for many years I've been thinking, oh, I'm helping groom this next generation of leaders. And lately I've been thinking, well, what am I doing? How am I a change agent in my own life? And how can I present that piece of myself, professionally, and still maintain, my sort of role as their teacher. But I think really being real, and we've talked a lot in this conference about the need for community and collaboration, and we're all just people, whether we're the student, the administrator, the teacher, what have you. Okay. So I think we ought to groom them that way.
Whole bunch of themes of how do we walk the talk we give and give added inspiration that way. This one. Thank you. Good.
Hi, I'm Michael Wang from Georgetown University. I was curious if you could touch upon how your work, I guess, links up to the, maybe at the university-wide level as universities themselves are changing. So, reimagining what does the future university look like, and sustainability and sort of the idea project. You talked about your courses, maybe on degree level, how do you think about the restructuring of project-based learning, the courses that, Jason, you talked about? So I'm just curious if, how does the university leadership and decision makers fuse with the way that you're approaching with some of the work that you've done? Does that question kind of make sense? I guess just really curious, since the landscape in talking about innovation, it's not just on the sustainability front. How does that link up to how universities themselves are connecting with the work that you're doing?
Others?
Just a quick thank you, Bill, for bringing up, the Brundtland definition and really saying we should not tinker with it and just, take the pieces we like of it. And it's one thing that I see at some of our schools and in many corporations, and I cringe when I hear that, when people talk about environmental sustainability. Because it's really an oxymoron for me. If it's just environmental, it's not sustainable. And so to really look what Brundtland, what this whole process did to say this is about the linkage between human beings, their well-being, the environmental well-being. This is about the whole package. You cannot just take a parcel of it. It's really important. And I think as we address these things in our courses, in our research, to look at the special linkages between environmental aspects and human aspects in technology. Some people talk about social technical innovation as has been falling a little bit out of favor, I think is a term. But really to see how our societies need to change with technology and how this enables each other. I think we need more of that.
Okay. Going once, going twice. Last comment.
Hi, Enid Cardinal at Rochester Institute of Technology. A question of semantics, I think. I think innovation is becoming a buzzword just as much as sustainability is. And I think we use it almost interchangeably with the word change. And change tends to have a negative connotation. Innovation tends to have a positive connotation. And I'm just curious how you define innovation as opposed to just something that changes things. For us to better understand how innovation does relate to sustainability.
Let me invite you to start with that one, since
Sure.
I probably should have done that one back when I tried to frame this session.
Sure. First of all, I do think terms like innovation, entrepreneurship, they are very open for discussion. But I think the way the Harvard Innovation Lab we talk about it actually comes from some folks from MIT who I've interacted with. I like the definition that group used was, at the end of the day, I think innovation involves some form of invention, some form of new insight. So change and innovation, using that definition, would have different connotations to them. I think where's the invention in the word when they're using it, and you ask yourself to sort of disclose what might be the pretenders from the real users. But certainly it's a term du jour. To me, entrepreneurship is more about the skills around commercializing inventions or innovations. So they come together. They're not interchangeable. They're distinct and separate. So I'll leave it at that.
Others on any of the comments that came up?
Well, I'd like to pick up this question, how can we change our own settings or the universities to become more, self-reflecting process. And at least to our experience, it's important to find a well-balanced approach between top-down and bottom-up. So it's essential and it's a basic need that you get a really substantial backing from your top leadership. And this has been discussed in the metrics discussion before. If you have no resources, if you have no capacities, it's nice, but it won't work. But on the other hand, you also need the pressure or the kind of the willingness from top down. And so what we try to do is really working on the top level, on the board level, with convincing arguments to convince the board to move in this direction. That's the one thing, but also to support students' activities, staff members' activities. We discussed yesterday that all our employees, which are really making a great share in our community, to empower them to make a change and to have this kind of balance between top-down and bottom-up. And so far, I think that worked quite well. And the other thing is also to transparently reflect your own role, and that goes back to reporting. So our experience with all the reporting and metrics issues was we are not reporting for the sake to report. We are using this process to rethink critically what we are doing. Is this the right thing? What is really essential? What should we do in future with the future steps? So this is kind of a tool to that helps to move the process forward. But it's always a balance between top-down and bottom-up.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll respond to the question asked directly and try to link it to the question of parts and whole. I think that one approach, as you described, would be when you study a science, you learn the history of that science. I think also there used to be courses in the history of science that would actually look at what was happening in multiple scientific streams, and even understanding the hinges of history of when the modern scientific paradigm emerged and what were the conditions under which it emerged. And that is now pushed to the margins for someone who might take a small course and the like. So that then perpetuates the lack of context and people tending to pull pieces that they want: environmental sustainability, financial sustainability. It also drives me insane. And but then you get back to the retreat from core curriculum, which I don't know what in Europe it is, but in the US there's a real resistance to committing to a core curriculum. And then fragmented faculty interests who are off in their disciplines, in particular departments, who in many cases don't have the desire to teach large expansive courses like the history of science. Instead, everybody is wanting to teach smaller seminars where they're zeroing in on some particular aspect. So that's a cultural problem, and I feel like I'm taking too much time now, but okay. Oh, at the end, all right.
Yeah.
So I'll try to say how at the end. Yeah.
Okay. Jason, on these comments, and you'll get your 1 minute too.
Okay.
Okay. My one commentary on the question I posed, which was, what would universities I know have to do differently in their innovation programs? In 2 words, it would be get serious. Question to you: think for your own universities. What would be the allowable failure rate in efforts to innovate that you'd be prepared for your operation to report back to the president's office and say, we're really into this promoting sustainability stuff and we're pushing innovation hard? Just spend a moment and think, what's the highest failure rate you'd be willing to report back saying, that's why you should think we're doing a good job? 15 seconds. Figure out what the number is. Okay. Now, simply then comment, most of the serious industry R&D groups that are, this is the technical innovation crowd that I know of, their innovation shop managers would say if their divisions came back to them and said that they were succeeding more than 20% of the time, that is, they had a failure rate less than 80%, they would fire them and say that you're being too conservative. How many were willing to report failure rates of higher than 80% to their president as a claim for why you should get more resources? Okay, I rest my case. I don't know what the right number is for universities, but it cannot conceivably be in the, well, we only fail 5% of the time, or we never fail. We just do all this innovation stuff and it always works out. I think we need to be insisting to our management structures that no one knows how to do this stuff. Otherwise, it would be being done. We're trying to, your question for define innovation, purposive attempts to meet a real human need. One version or another of that. We don't know how to do it. We're going to fail most of the time, especially if we tackle the really hard problems that aren't just automatically attracting people to come and solve them themselves, and they've already made their money or other rewards doing it. So I basically don't think universities are in the innovation business. We're in it more than we were 10 years ago in terms of advancing this stuff. But we haven't developed a culture for most universities that accepts the kinds of failure rates that at least I, as a scientist and sometimes technology guy, am accustomed to when thinking about successful innovation. So I'll let, if that has offended any of my colleagues up here, You each now have a minute to say anything you want to say about wrapping up this session, and then I'll turn it back to Heather. So let me start at the end with Christine.
Well, as you asked, what was the major asset, or what are we missing most? And I think it's really this cultural shift of our university. So how do we get rid of this kind of bookkeeping mentality in order to create a more inspiring and a more risky environment to step forward?
Thank you, Jason.
My brain is full of thoughts. I guess what I'd like to say is that I want to react actually to what you just said about failure rates. I think part of the reason that the instinctive failure rate of the campus sustainability person is low is because you're dealing with heavy physical infrastructure on the order of tens of millions of dollars. And physical civil infrastructure is costly like that, and so failure is super expensive. And it's one thing for an R&D group and a software company to say that our failure rate is 80%. It's a completely different thing to say, I'm going to build a $60 million building and have it fail. So I think there's two places I go with that. One is, how do you fail sooner in creative building design using simulation tools? So you fail in simulation rather than in $60 million buildings. And the second is that there's probably a lot more scope for innovation on some of those other metrics or constituents of sustainability that you were saying. So for example, if you want to promote health on the campus through healthier eating and healthier living, trying out different kinds of behavior change competitions and campaigns could be done at a more rapid cycle of cycle time and lower cost. And so more failure rate and innovation may be possible in those domains. This thing I wanted to say is just one more concept to throw out here is that the idea that innovation, as a matter of definition, is about breaking trade-offs. So if we think about there being a trade-off between lifestyle and environment, like I have to give up stuff to be able to help the environment. Well, break that trade-off. Come up with a way in which you get to keep having a lifestyle that you want and preserve the environment. To do that might require you to have lower impact technologies or lower impact mobility or whatever it is. So breaking trade-offs, I think, is for me very definitional of innovation and something that we should be thinking about on our campuses as well as in developing students.
Thank you. Gordon.
So I think I too have a number of thoughts, but I would just say, first of all, I think I would implore all of us to continue to stay focused on learning and being adaptable. I'm assuming this is an audience primarily in running various operations around sustainability on your campuses or influencing it. It's something that's near and dear to the Innovation Lab. I think even today, where are we weak and where are we strong? Definitely, I believe there's opportunity to help individuals who do have those ideas think about second order benefits or implications of the work they're doing. But I also think turn it back to all of us and say, what is that role? If you are managing large infrastructure, my guess is that creates the risk aversion profile. Where are you going to be innovating? My guess, I'd be imploring you to be thinking about looking for partnerships, looking externally, whether that be within your university, but find folks where you can be iterating in a safer way. Please don't adopt an exclusive administrator mindset that gets you from here to a retirement package. Be bold. We all only have one shot at what we're doing, and I certainly implore all of us to stay adaptable and stay learning.
Thank you. Tom.
Okay, I'm going to pick up on the failure rate idea, 'cause at first I didn't like that framing, but I think it actually can work. And I would say that the failure rate, Davis, using your question, right now is 80%. We are failing our students, probably 80% of them, by educating them for a world that, if it ever existed 50 years ago. And we continue to perpetuate narrow, fragmented education over and over again, and we're very proud of it. And so that's a major problem. It's a cultural problem. Universities sometimes talk about themselves like they're innovative institutions. They're conservative institutions. That's where they came from. And they conserve and codify and then inculcate And that's the cultural function that they've played. But now, in the age of sustainability, they can't play that same role in that same way. So I guess, so I just don't explode from the frustration and the constraints, we need to open up a vigorous conversation about alternative models of higher education that are not based in disciplines, because the sum of the disciplines is insufficient to address the issues that we have. It's not about interdisciplinary or even transdisciplinary unless you use the IUCN definition, which brings practitioner and community knowledge into that.
Thank you. I cede my time to myself and turn to Heather to wrap things up. No, ma'am.
I think in the...
Your text said, Heather will close. I don't have the guts to.
Well, I think the challenge is that it's been very thought-provoking, and I think what we need to do in our working groups this afternoon and tomorrow is try to synthesize all of what we've heard and come up with a clear sort of vision for where we're headed, as we said yesterday, and sort of some short-term deliverables so that we can actually have some collective action and move this forward. But I want to thank very thought-provoking panel and very, very interesting questions from all of you. I think it was an interesting, engaged dialogue. I think that it also, like Gordon had said, I think we do want to look outside and have those partnerships, and probably do want to push the boundaries and have higher failure rates and explain why that's important. But I think Bill has demonstrated why a very important constituent remains for us to be linked to the research and teaching in our principles and our grounding, which I think gives us credibility and brings value to those partnerships. We're certainly happy to have Bill as our senior advisor in helping us on the President's task force on the future of where we're headed on sustainability. And I know you all have your own faculty or home institutions. So with that, I think we have very limited lunch. We only have an hour to go across the street and come back. And working groups are from 2 to 5, and Julie might have some logistics.
Just one final piece. This is the last time we're all in the plenary session today, so I just wanted to, as we bring closure, make 2 points. One is following up on something Heather said, is that we really encourage you, we set these panels up as an opportunity to make sure that the provocative ideas and thoughts that are coming out of the 4 panels from both yesterday and today carry into the working group session. So please bridge these 2 aspects of the conference together. And the other piece I was just asked to do is we just need to quickly thank the MIT team. We have a number of volunteers today. We have Sydney Glass-Soroka, Caroline Howe, Sophie Nee, Ravdeep Jaitka, Jessica Debatz, Has Nasiri, and Alex Marks, who are all responsible for making sure everything's running smoothly today. So if you could just join me in giving them all a round of applause. And once again, thank you, Bill and panel, for joining us today. Steve, one more piece from you. Again, you don't want me directing you around MIT, so I'm going to look to Steve.
I'm going to ask you to step off the stage, please, ma'am.